Hey, Johnny here, and today I'm building a dining table using two of these rare maple slabs that I've had lying around for a few years that I struggled to think of the right project for, but I think I found it on this table. I'm also taking a 1,000-year-old design and trying to improve upon that. So several months ago, I made a Kumiko table and said that I donate the proceeds to the Jonathan Katz Moses Woodworkers with Disabilities Fund. And I'm happy to announce that table just sold. Now, initially I had the table listed for $19,000. That also included a set of chairs that I was going to build, and the table wasn't selling, so I removed the option to get the chairs and dropped the price down to $12,000. Well, a couple months later, a buyer came in and offered me $10,000, and I accepted that offer. So the table sold for $10,000, and that table is going to get delivered to its new home, while the Jonathan Katz Moses Woodworkers with Disabilities Fund gets a nice donation in my wife's name. And when I said I was going to do this in that video, this left some viewers angry. They didn't like this gift and thought it was shitty that I sort of teased my wife into thinking that she would get that table for Christmas, and maybe they're right. Maybe it was a little shitty, but the thing my wife knows is that she is married to a woodworker. Sorry, a maker. And I could always just make her own Kumiko table. So that's what happened. She asked for a Kumiko table for our new house. I said yes. And right away I remembered these two curly maple flame burl cookies, slabs, whatever that I've had sitting in my shop for 2 years now with no idea what to do with. And I decided these would be perfect for this table, and I'm going to fill those voids with Kumiko panels. So far, you've seen me get the cookie slabs cleaned up and ready for that first round of epoxy pours. And while I get the epoxy form put together, let me explain what I'm thinking for the design of this table. Now, the top is going to be made up of those two maple cookie slabs, and then I'll pour black resin around those. And in the middle of those voids of the slabs, I'll create Kumiko panels to inlay. And this is where I felt like I have the opportunity to take that 1,000-year-old design and tweak it a bit. I'll be using the Asanoha Kumiko pattern, which I believe is the most common pattern. It's the one that I see the most. I'll be taking that design and adding my own twist, basically trying to elevate that design. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that I'm going to outdo Japanese woodworkers or ancient Japanese woodworking techniques. That's not the idea, and I hold Japanese woodworkers in the highest of regard, but rather the Asanoha pattern to me seems like sort of a template to build off of and maybe create something that's entirely different. There are many variations of Kumiko designs and many variations of the Asanoha pattern, and maybe what I'm going to end up doing looks like another Kumiko pattern that already exists, but my goal is to take that basic pattern and add some elements to make it something different, but more on that later. Whew. I often do this thing where I see some interesting slabs posted on Instagram and I snatch them up with no plan of what to really do with them. And such was the case with this book match set of maple cookies. I can't remember how these were labeled, but I think they were like quilted ambrosia, maple burl, something that makes it sound extra fancy. And there's a particular Instagram account called Worldwide Burl. They're based up in the Pacific Northwest where all the best lumber is. And they have these daily auctions on Instagram where you bid on different lots of slabs. And I believe I got these for $350, something like that. And they looked really interesting, and I knew eventually I'd use them for something. And then they just sat there. 2 years go by, and periodically I'd start a new project. I'd pull these two slabs out, lay them down on the ground, walk around them, move them around in different orientations, only to determine they just weren't right for the piece that I was building at the time. But I think I finally have the right project on this table. The first issue that I have to deal with is cleaning up those voids, and this took a lot of work. The inner portion of these cookie slabs was a complete mess with lots of rot and brittle sections, and this little 3-inch Rotex sander is clutch for this operation. This is one of those tools I rarely use, but when I do have to use it, it's the perfect tool for the job, but I'm not sure that justifies the $500+ that this thing runs. The other tool that I really love for slab cleanup is these little flap wheel sanders that chuck up into a regular drill. These run much less than $500, more like $10, and they are the best thing that I've found for getting into some of those harder to reach areas. But they do throw up a ton of dust, hence the Darth Vader dust mask contraption that I'm wearing right here. But I do like to throw links down in the description to all the useful tools that I use in each video. So I've got those down below. Make sure to check them out. They're all Amazon affiliate links, and anything that you purchase throws a little spare change my way, which goes to help support Johnny Builds. And of course, I always appreciate that. I'm going to be pouring the epoxy in stages, and this first round of pours is to lock in the slabs in place and to test the form for leaks. I'll be using Total Boat Thickset epoxy, which is my favorite of all the epoxies, and I like to tint it black with some India ink. And this stuff is the perfect balance of a deeper pour epoxy that flows really well, but then doesn't take 5 to 6 days to cure like the 2-inch deep pour epoxy like Thickset Fathom. And if you want to check out all the different Total Boat products that I use, I've got a link below to the Total Boat website, and that link will automatically get you a discount on all their products on the website. This is another great way to support my channel and my longest time sponsor. So again, I thank all of you who have done that and will do that. I am happy to report I had no leaks on these pours, but what I did have was some other projects that came in that kind of took priority. So after the first few rounds of pours, I set this project aside for about 3 months to work on these other builds. So here we are 3 months later with a couple new tattoos. That's always the case. And it's time to dive back into building this table. Now, I really don't like doing projects this way. I much prefer to have a vision for a project and then just go all out executing it. And my worry is that the vision I have for this table 3 months ago and the new ideas that I've come up with since setting it aside won't mesh well together. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I've been milling up some maple and walnut to make the Kumiko panel, and you may notice a few new tools around the shop. Grizzly sent me out a few new tools to try, including this 1,000-pound beast of a 12-inch helical head joiner. And also, if you look in the background, that's a sliding table saw back there. I'm really excited about that. But at this point in the project, I didn't have it dialed in yet, so I wasn't able to use it yet. Oh, and I'm happy to report another new tool that I got from Grizzly is this drum sander. So no more of those hour-and-a-half round trips to borrow my buddy's drum sander. And for those that are new here, the whole saga is I sold my drum sander to a friend a couple years ago because I never used it, but I basically needed it for every project since then. But now, again, I have my own drum sander, and I promise I'm never selling this thing again. And as I'm talking about this, I'm starting to realize this is probably how most hoarders get their start. I mean, if we could flash to the future when I'm 90 and whatever version of American Pickers is on, and it's two guys digging through my barn of junk, coming up with killer finds like an early century Grizzly drum sander and a near mint condition classic Honda Ridgeline. And side note, I think it's kind of hard to imagine new cars these days one day becoming classic collectible cars in like 50 years. Like, try to imagine a classic car show in the future and it's decked out with like this sweet cherry red Honda Civic or a Ford Fusion. Or imagine being like an old man at a classic car show and getting really nostalgic over a Toyota Camry. And I'm not trying to shit on any of those vehicles. I just try to come up with 3 of the most basic common cars that I think of. I mean, I am the guy driving a Honda Ridgeline unironically, so I have no room to talk shit about anyone else's choice of vehicle. The last time I made Kumiko panels, I used the angle grid, which makes cutting the infill pieces slightly easier, but this time I'm going to use a square grid, which does add a bit of complexity around cutting the angles of the Kumiko strips. But I feel like I should be able to get much more consistently sized panels, meaning I should be able to cut all the infill strips to the exact same size and have everything fit. And while that seems like it should always be the case, what happens is once you start putting in the infill pieces, it has a tendency to kind of warp the grid ever so slightly. Not enough where it's noticeable, but enough where the pieces don't fit in the same way. And you have to spend extra time fine-tuning them, getting everything to fit. And so far, these grids are fitting together really snugly. It actually made putting the grid together a bit difficult, but at the same time, it fits together so well that I don't need to add glue. Nor could I attempt to take it apart to add glue without breaking this thing all to pieces. So I'm gonna set these aside and work on the strips. But before I do that, I wanna say real quick, thank you to everyone who watches the sponsor reads in these videos, as this is how I'm able to keep the lights on here at Johnny Builds. And with that said, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. Looking for the Vegas experience, but don't want to leave your house? Enter Golden Nugget Online Casino. Did you know that Golden Nugget Online Casino has a casino app where you can play all your favorite casino games right on your phone? And the best part is I'm partnering with Golden Nugget Online Casino to let you know about an awesome deal that they have going on right now. But first, let me tell you all about the app. Golden Nugget Online Casino is a real money online gambling app. You can play a variety of games, including slots, blackjack, roulette, and other live dealer games. You guys suggested that I try out blackjack in the last video, and it's been my favorite game. You can safely and confidently play your favorite online casino games with one of the longest standing casino brands in the USA, where Golden Nugget Online Casino is fully regulated and licensed to operate legally. Golden Nugget Online Casino is simple and easy to use. You can quickly navigate through all the available games and play right from your phone or tablet. Golden Nugget Online Casino offers exciting and rewarding promotions, including limited time offers, bonuses, loyalty programs, and more. If you like the games that you saw, download the Golden Nugget Online Casino app today, use my promo code JohnnyBuilds, and new customers who deposit a minimum of $5 will get $50 in casino credits. Thanks to Golden Nugget Online Casino for sponsoring this video. I'd like to fully acknowledge that while I'm creating something that was first started 1,300 years ago or so, nothing about the way I'm putting this together involves traditional method. I mean, there's the fact that I'm cutting all these strips on my table saw, but given how I have about 800 pieces I need to process for these two panels, I'm also going to use the disc sander to cut in all the angles on the infill pieces. And this is literally going to save me multiple days of work. But it does feel a bit like cheating. And as you'll see, the cost of taking this shortcut is all the skin that I sanded off my knuckles. As I was doing this, I started to come up with some ideas to create sort of a 3D printed jig to attach to the disc sander. I think I could make this process a bit more streamlined, but mainly I would do it to protect my knuckles from getting sanded off while I worked. And it was sort of like when you bite your lip on accident and your lip swells up and then you end up biting your lip 100 more times and it's way worse. Imagine working on the disc sander and hitting the same spot of your knuckle that you've already skinned raw. And I'm telling you this so if you decide to try this technique, I really want to caution you to be extremely careful. To save a bit more time, I'm going to lay out the grids over the middle of the voids and put an X on all the squares that I can avoid putting Kumiko infill on since they're just going to get cut off later on. Okay, so I've got all the grids put together and the diagonals down in here. And the last time I did Kumiko, I talked about how some of the Kumiko artisans don't even use glue. Everything is friction fit together. And while I'm no artisan, check this out. There is not a single stitch of glue anywhere on here. Next, I've got to cut all what's called the hinge pieces. There's 180 that I need to make. Since I'm going to be using that disc sander jig, it's not as straightforward as if I was going to be using the Kumiko jigs where I'm sitting there pairing off every one. But I think I've got it figured out and it should be a lot faster this way. I'm trying to get this project wrapped up. So we're going to make those on the disc sander. So I mentioned in the beginning of this video that I was going to try to elevate or improve upon this 1,000-year-old plus design. And while I don't know if I'm improving it, I mean, I'll let y'all be the judge at the end of the video, but rather take that empty canvas that is the basic Asanoha Kumiko pattern and turn it into something else entirely. And here's a couple examples of what I played around with in my modeling software. I went through various designs before landing on the right one, but there really is no limit to how you can customize a Kumiko panel to your own liking. Just looking online for inspiration, I found a lot of really interesting designs and patterns, but like I've mentioned in previous videos, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to keep yourself from doing too much. So I settled on these pieces that sort of create a flower pattern. And I could have put these everywhere, but this would have been about 800 more pieces to add, plus it's going to get really busy. So here's the final design that I landed on. And it looks sort of basic now, but I still have one more trick up my sleeve that will tie it into my last build, that buffet cabinet that I made for Katie. And also, if you haven't seen that video, make sure you go check it out, as these two pieces both kind of go in the same dining room of our new home and create what is supposed to be, well, sort of a matching set. Anyways, you just need to check out that video and then watch this one, and then let me know what you think about how these two builds go together. I like to think that I learn from my mistakes, and that's not always the case as I continue to do dumb stuff all the time. But here I'm gluing on these tabs to help hold the pieces down on the CNC as I carve these flower petal shapes to add to the Kumiko. And this is one of those simple solutions where I feel sort of extra dumb that I didn't think of it sooner. I mean, I could have saved some expensive bits on the CNC from running into the screws that I use to hold the pieces down. Also, a viewer just left a comment in my last video and talked about where on the newest version of the Vectric software that I use to create my G-code, there's an option for creating exclusion zones on your workpiece. And I'm excited to figure that out. I haven't done that yet. I haven't downloaded the new software, but that'll be really handy for future builds. But right now, this board has about 300 of those flower petals that I need to carve out. And to avoid cutting tabs off of 300 pieces, I carve these all about 3/4 of an inch through the panel. And then I have to take that over to the bandsaw and cut those out to release all those infill pieces. And one of the main reasons that I landed on this flower petal shape is I had a hunch that if I tried to inlay full wedges, imagine a slice of pie, and if I tried to inlay it that way, the likelihood of them not fitting perfectly was hovering somewhere around 99.9%. So by removing the lower half of that wedge, I'm basically ensuring these pieces will fit in nicely as they all have the proper angle cut in on the sides. And I'll admit, they weren't perfect. The spacing all the way around that flower shape wasn't spot on, but it was pretty close. And I personally think that any variation of the petals kind of lends towards the natural organic shape of a real flower, or at least that's my excuse to make the technique sound better. I haven't glued in any other part of the Kumiko panel up to this point, but I know here that if I don't glue in these pieces, they're going to float up when I pour the epoxy. And pouring the epoxy is the next step. So on the last Kumiko table, I cut the panels into their shape to fit into the slab voids first, and then poured the epoxy into the middle of the slabs with the Kumiko inlay in place. And this did work, but I did have a lot of pieces breaking off when I was cutting that shape out with a jigsaw. So this time I decided to switch it up and pour the epoxy first. Basically create one large Kumiko panel. Then once that epoxy is cured and locks all those pieces in place, I'll be able to cut those panels into the proper shape to fit down into the slab voids. Again, I'm going to be using Total Boat Thickset epoxy tinted with black India ink, and bubbles are my biggest concern like any pour, so I'm brushing the epoxy up and around all the pieces in order to coat and seal every surface that I can. I'll be making the base for this table out of more walnut, and here's a quick diagram of the design that I modeled up. Now, I wouldn't call this design Japanese woodworking per se, but it is inspired somewhat by Japanese tables that I've seen. And I'm also going to carve in the Asanoha pattern onto the outer showing faces of the legs. It'll feature a wedge mortise and tenon joinery method that will hold the three pieces of the base together without the need for any sort of mechanical fasteners. And then I'll be carving those legs over on the CNC. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these up beforehand, and this way I can carve the shape all at once. I really don't think in hindsight that this was necessary on this piece, as it would have been easy to glue these up after the fact, but this method is going to save a bit of time, so that's what I'm going to do. So like I mentioned earlier, how my 3-inch Festool Rotex sander was one of those expensive tools that I don't use that often, but I really love it when I have. That leads me to another tool that I've rarely used, but this one set me back double what that little sander did, and that's this 3D scanner. But I feel like this is a good investment. And so far, all I've used that scanner for is to scan the slabs for the 2 Kumiko tables that I'm built. So I can't say that it's paid for itself yet, but I can envision all sorts of uses for 3D scanning on my furniture builds. I don't know what all those things are yet, but this is what I keep telling myself to continue to justify the fact that I basically bought a really cool toy. And once that's done, I can pull that 3D model that this scan creates into my modeling software. And then using a sketching tool called a fit point spline, I can draw on the shape of the voids of these two slabs fairly accurately. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is close enough that you can't tell that I've carved around the void of the slab. It's all going to look sort of organic. And I'll show you that here in a bit. First, I'm going to put the Kumiko panel on the CNC to flatten off the excess epoxy and reveal the Kumiko pattern. And this panel finished at about 5/8 of an inch thick. So I need to go back and carve those slabs to ensure that there's a 90-degree edge all the way around and that it carves away enough material for that Kumiko panel to fit in vertically. But I don't trust myself and my accuracy, so first I'll carve the voids on a sheet of plywood, and then after I carve that, I can go back to the slabs and confirm that everything fits, and then take the slabs, epoxy form and all, back on the CNC and carve the pockets to accept those Kumiko panels. And the next carve is the most stressful carve of all. I mean, this is about a week of my life sitting on the CNC right here, and one errant carve could cause the need to build the whole thing over. While I know that would make for an interesting storytelling aspect of this video, I very much do not want to deal with that right now, especially on this piece with right around 1,100 pieces that make up the Kumiko pattern and grid. And this turned out really nice. Now, I did cut these offset to the inside so they'll fit down nicely in the voids. And anytime you're inlaying such an organic shape like this, you need some extra tolerance to fit, and I was extra cautious, and I actually carved these 1/4 inch more narrow than the voids that they're filling, and then that'll just get filled up with the epoxy at the end. Right now I'm going to epoxy these in place to keep them from shifting or floating before the next epoxy pour. And this is where I get to have a little fun with this design by adding the same koi fish design from that buffet cabinet on the table. Now on the buffet I used epoxy, but on this table I'm going to carve in the recess for the koi fish. And the idea is to create something that looks like a couple of koi ponds in the voids of those cookie slabs. I'll add 2 koi in each void, being careful to position them so it appears that they're swimming around the flower details in those Kumiko panels, which this did take a bit of prior planning where I had to measure the locations of where I wanted to inlay the koi. And then I've got that model of the voids of the slabs that I made from scanning the table, and with those measurements I can program the G-code to carve in those koi cutouts. And when I make the koi, I'm going to be doing this with contrasting wood of maple for the main body of the fish and then purple heart for the spots. Again, I want to avoid the need for tabs, so I'm going overkill with the double-sided tape right here to hold these down. And I did add a bit of tolerance. I think I offset these pieces about 1/20th of an inch. I know that's kind of a crazy number to throw out, but you know, hey, we don't use metric. Anyways, this is another super organic shape where it needs a bit of extra tolerance to kind of fit together. So I did make these a bit smaller, and then this also creates a very thin gap around each piece. So when I pour the epoxy, this is gonna sort of create a subtle outline. I'm going to use Total Built High Performance Epoxy to lock these in place before that last round of epoxy pours. And before doing those final pours, I need to clean up a bunch of the cracks on top of the slabs. And I'll use my Dremel with this tiny ball nose bit to make quick work of this. So as I'm nearing the end of this build, I can begin to see that initial vision come to life. And I started thinking about where I started with this design and where I ended up. And stepping away from a project for 3 months is never ideal, but that's what happened, and this table is different because of that. I mean, my designs are always evolving, up to the minute that I begin, to the whole time that I'm building, and reality, it continues even after I'm done. I mean, there probably isn't a single thing that I built that I wouldn't modify now somehow, and for me, this is really a good thing. On one hand, my initial designs are usually terrible, and I don't think for a second that I'm some master designer. I mean, I'm definitely not. I'd say I'm passable at design at best, but one of the greatest equalizers is time. So when I have extra time to iterate further, to incorporate new ideas, to get rid of ideas that I initially liked but later realized that didn't work, I feel like this is the secret sauce to being able to design my pieces in a way that I'm finally happy with. And none of this ever comes naturally or easy. I mean, the more I build furniture, the more I have a back catalog to inform future design decisions, but I still have to seek out inspiration. I need to see colors and materials and scale and texture, and sometimes I get so inspired that I just want to build something that already exists. And I say all this to explain my process to anyone who's ever thinking about getting into design themselves, especially if you're like me and you don't identify as an artist. If you want to design but don't love your existing ideas, my suggestion is to just get those down on paper, or even better yet, learn to use a modeling software. SketchUp and Shaper 3D are my faves, but there are a lot out there. I'm not loyal to any of them, but regardless, get that first idea out of your head. And it's important in my process just to have something that I can start working off of. So in this case, I poured epoxy all the way around those two slabs with a loose idea of what I wanted this table to be, and then had to set that aside while I tackled some other projects. And during that time, I built my wife the buffet cabinet she's been asking for the last 4 years. And while designing that buffet, I needed something that elevated that piece, so I came up with the idea to inlay and pour epoxy to create koi fish. And when I came back to working on this piece, I was able to take this new design element, something that was never supposed to be part of my original plan, but rather something that came due to stepping away. I was able to take that element, incorporated it into this project, and I think that was the final piece of the puzzle this design needed. And sometimes I need to be reminded that it's all about trusting the process. And at this point, it's beginning to sound a little cliche because I say it so much and I sell merch with that slogan. Seriously, go check out my merch. But it's exactly true. And I want to expand upon that saying, or maybe even add a new slogan that can live alongside trust the process. And that's put in the reps. Now, none of this comes naturally to me. Not woodworking, not design, or anything else that I quit my day job to do full-time YouTube for. So my little classroom motivational hang in there poster for this project is that no matter what it is that you think you might want to do, or maybe you don't believe in yourself, put in the reps. Even the most gifted athlete or artist, or actually especially the most gifted athlete, artist, or anyone else succeeding in life, they all have to put in the reps. I mean, you never master anything the first time you try it. You have to put in the repetition. You have to do it over and over in order to master something. So put in the reps, and thus ends the motivational speech portion of this video. And if you watch this far into the video, comment this down below. And to reward those viewers that watch my stuff, I'll pick a random comment in a week to win a free Johnny Builds t-shirt of your choice. And side note, any sort of creativity that you use with the comment that you leave is going to dramatically increase the completely random, using air quotes here, the totally random comment that I pick. So I've tried this cold casting brass twice now. I did it once, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, and then I did it yesterday. And both times that I've tried it, I've had horrible results. It looks like green, what are we calling it? Vomit? Dog poop? It doesn't look good. You know, the first time I did it, I didn't use enough powder. So this time, according to the directions on this powder right here, it's 2 parts epoxy, 1 part the brass powder. I went even more than that because my first time I did it, I didn't put enough and the powder all sank and it looked terrible. So this time I did 1 part epoxy, 1 part brass powder, and it just didn't turn out good. So in order to fix this, I kind of went through a couple different ideas. First one being, just screw it. Let's just throw this in the trash and, you know, just make a completely different base. But Andy actually had a really good idea. He suggested that we put this back on the CNC, recarb everything, and then pour new epoxy. The problem with that is it's really difficult to get the CNC to line up with the existing carves, but I'm gonna go out to the CNC, I'm gonna carve in a pocket that the leg will fit in. That'll give me like a good work zero to start from. And then I'm gonna use a 3/16 inch bit to carve the new cutouts. And then we'll just put black epoxy in here. It's gonna match the top better. Probably what I should have done in the first place, but I tried to get cute, and this is what happens. Andy, I don't think that I've ever accidentally fix something that I wasn't trying to fix, but that's exactly what happened here. You know, I was just planing off the epoxy and kind of planing down further to clear off the brass powder. And what I think happened was kind of what I was saying before, that brass powder is heavy. So the first time I ever did this, I didn't put enough and it sunk down in there. Well, even though I put way, way more than the recommended amount of brass powder in the epoxy, it still sunk on me. So when I planed off about probably close to 1/4 inch of what I removed from material. Didn't mean to go that far, but I got down to the actual metallic looking particles down in there, and it looks really good, and I'm gonna leave it because it looks like what I wanted it to look like. I wasn't trying to save it, but I did.
It's like somebody needs to learn how to trust the process.
If only there was a t-shirt or a sign right behind me. Yeah. So that was a happy little accident. It's not often that I accidentally fix a mistake, but I'm just gonna roll with it. Next, I need to carve these wedges on the CNC, and I have very little, basically no experience cutting in deep mortises like this. So everything you see me doing, I'm either doing what I've seen someone else do or just completely winging it. And the tricky part of this mortise is cutting in the proper angle, which I'm just having to eyeball based on that line that I traced off the side of the stretcher. And you'll notice too that I started with my Japanese chisels, but quickly realized these were the wrong tool for the job. So I ran out to the store and picked up a set of mortising chisels. Now, these have a long, straight, flat back for making cutting deep mortises like this easier and more accurate. One more final detail on the legs. I'm gonna make a 2-tiered plate to add to the top and bottom of the legs. Now, these are just some walnut blocks that I cut to 5 and 6 inches square, and then I added a round over to. And then these get glued together, and after adding a round over to the legs, I'll attach these to the top and the bottom. Now, on the bottom, these are gonna serve as extra wide feet to add some stability, and then on the top, these are gonna serve as plates to attach the tabletop. Now, it's been a few days since I poured the epoxy, and it's cured enough to flatten off the excess. And this might be my favorite shot of this whole video right here, as I'm flattening and that bit reveals that final pattern. I flip it over and flatten the bottom, and this tabletop is gonna finish right at 1 3/4 inches thick. And while it's on the CNC, I'll go ahead and cut in the final profile. Now, this table ended up being 71 inches long by 28 inches wide. So a bit on the small side for a dining room table, but our dining room is much smaller in the new house, so this ought to fit in there nicely. Also, 28 inches is on the narrow side of a dining table, but again, I think it's gonna work for the space that this table is gonna be living in. The flattening bit leaves a pretty rough surface, and this required a ton of sanding, and it's definitely time to retram my CNC, essentially ensure the spindle is coplanar with the table, but that's a problem for future Johnny. Right now, I'm gonna get this table all wrapped up. After flattening, there are a fair amount of little pinholes and cracks that I need to fill with epoxy. I'm gonna add about a 1/2 inch round over to the top of the table, and then do the final sanding, water pop it, sand back that raised grain, and then sand the bottom. And finally, I can add finish, which I'm gonna go with the old standby Rubio Monocoat. So if you look at any of my recent builds, it's becoming sort of clear that I'm in the middle of a Japanese-inspired woodworking phase of my maker career, and I'll likely keep that going for a while. Like I said at the beginning, I hold Japanese woodworkers in the highest regard, so I feel like I'm learning a lot and improving my skills, trying to incorporate their style and their techniques into my builds. Definitely let me know down in the comment section what you think of my own personal version of Kumiko, or maybe I should call it Koi Miko. Either way, tell me what you think. Did I elevate a 1,300-year-old design, or should I just left it well enough alone? I think it looks really good, but let's go find out what the boss thinks. Okay, unfortunately, Katie couldn't make it by the shop to see the table in person, so we're gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way, FaceTime. She's not answering. There she is. Hi. So I just told everyone that you can't make it by the shop, so we're gonna have to do this reveal over FaceTime. So are you ready to see your new dining table?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Let me flip you around. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
That is gorgeous.
Kumiko,
Finish.
Kumiko, just like I teased you on that one table. But then I added, the koi fish to match the buffet.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, so there's brass inlay Kumiko inlay in the base. It's held together with these wedges, and there's actually no mechanical fasteners holding that together other than those wedges, which is kind of cool.
That was very technical.
There is your new dining table, and
That is beautiful.
I will bring it home in probably like 2 or 3 months whenever I get around to it.
No.
All right, well, the wife seems to like it, but I really want to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you're not already, please get subscribed if you enjoy what you watched. And remember, trust the process, put in the reps, I don't know, whatever other sort of, goofy motivational things that I could say. Hang in there, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, Andy, speaking of putting in the reps, what do you say we do a couple 12-ounce curls?
Sounds good to me.
Oh, yeah. Trust the process?